I say and using that for our own marketing and promotional purposes. The undertaking we give you is that you can say anything you wish during tonight, and that will be edited out during the process, so you won't be included in any of our marketing if you don't wish to be, or you won't be included at all. We will be editing it out. There's no video, so nobody's having to watch me apart from you guys. Sorry, you get my face. The online people don't have to worry about that. If you do choose to share something about your business, it's entirely up to you. There is no compulsion to say what your business is or what your business is doing. If you wish to share something, that's absolutely fine. If you don't want to, that's okay as well. We're as confidential as you choose to be tonight. Having said that, if you want to ask questions, you can always put it in. I have this friend who has this issue. That's absolutely fine. It might even be correct for some of you as well. All right, so with that by way of introduction, we are a relatively small group. Please do give questions as we go along, but we will get kicked off. All right. So the topic for today is the business value gap, and we're going to start with actually trying to work out, well, what does that mean? All right, you've all come along. You're obviously interested in businesses and in business value, and you might be wondering what this topic might be. All right. So you're all good? Okay. So I'm going to talk about what we mean by that in a moment. We'll also talk about how to estimate the current value of your business, and the bulk of today is actually going to be talking about how to do a business valuation. Right? Then we're going to look at, is there a gap between what your business is worth now and what it might need to be worth, or you'd like it to be worth, to fund a future lifestyle that you want to have. Right? For a lot of people, selling the business is how they're going to fund their retirement. For some people not, they've already got enough. This might just be cream on the cake. But we'll have a look at that, and the gap might be how much you want it to be versus how much it is at the moment. There's some silly statistic that over 90% of small business people do not know the market value of their business in the current market right now, right? Let alone what they might want it to be later on. There's a whole lot more who have great dreams, but their dreams are not all that linked to reality. Today, we're hoping to link those things together. And as part of that, developing your sales strategy, your exit strategy, your succession plan, and some of the options in there. Right? So that's the agenda for the first 3 hours. By the time we get to about 10 o'clock, only kidding. All right. So what are we talking about when we talk about the business value gap? The value gap is the gap, as already indicated, between what the business is worth today, which implies that we might find out what the business is worth today, and what the business you want it to be worth at a sale point in the future, or what you might be able to build it up to become. Right? And we've got a lot of techniques and tools and advice and a lot of experience in selling other client businesses with them and with you guys to build that and to narrow that gap so that your business does deliver the sale proceeds that you want it to be. And of course, the cherry on the cake that we also work for, which is not in the slides, but I'll just mention it, is under the current rules, if you are eligible, eligibility is quite complex, that sale might actually be able to be rendered tax-free. Now, when your accountant says tax-free, you've got to have a hot flush. This is a big thing. Okay? All right. So please hear what I said. There's a lot of eligibility criteria. There are a lot of conditions. It's quite complex. In fact, just over the way on the other side of the lake, one of the Supreme Court judges said, and I can nearly quote it, these rules are fiendishly complex. Right? When a judge is saying that, you know you've got issues. But if you can become eligible, if you survive all the hurdles, tax-free is always a good thing. Have a whole flush moment. Okay, so who does it affect? Right? Business owners planning to sell or to retire, or business owners who are simply relying on the sale of their business to provide them with not just a retirement lifestyle, but maybe a lifestyle to bridge between now and retirement. I'm doing work with clients at the moment where they have the ability to sell the business in their 40s and they will get enough cash to fund their retirement through to age 60, when they'll then be able to raid their super. Right? They're obviously in a very special position. We've got some other clients who are well and truly 55, 56, and they simply need funding for the 4 or 5 years to take them through to age 60 when they can access their superannuation. Okay? So sometimes it's not immediate, sometimes it's a bridging thing. The deal that I helped a client with only a couple of weeks ago, and whom I'll be joining on a Zoom meeting with London in an hour and a half's time, they've sold out and they're in their early 30s for £2 million. Nice problem to have. hey? Yes. I did say I was available for adoption, but they haven't. So for many of you, your business will be the ultimate source of retirement wealth. For some of you, it won't. Fantastic. Okay. So in terms of, let's just illustrate what we're talking about with the business valuation gap. The business income for the company or the business that you're doing, let's just assume for the sake of the illustration, might be $750,000. We have a business profit, it's running at 15% profit on turnover, sounds like a nice number. So the profit's $112,000 per annum. And we have this thing called a cap rate, which I'm going to go into shortly, don't lose sleep over it now. And we've calculated a capitalisation rate of 2.88, sounds like an interesting number. And when you multiply that by that, you arrive at a business value of $325,000. Sounds okay. Probably like another zero on the end of it. That $325,000, we do some other analysis and typically some financial planning analysis that Bob can help out with. And we say, well, actually, we need you to get $600,000 in order to fund that lifestyle that you want in retirement. So we need it to be worth 600. It's currently only worth 300. We have a gap. How can we fix that gap? So valuation shortfall, $300,000. How long before you intend to sell? In this particular boxed up example, we've got 13 years to move the value equation. That's plenty of time. All right? Should be able to do it faster than that. So we've only got about 67% of what we want. If we roll forward 3 years, not 13, we've done some work. All right? Now the business is turning over $900,000 because we've chased sales, we've improved whatever processes there are, we've built the business bigger. Right? The profit's running at 20%, so slightly bigger profit figure. The cap rate, we've de-risked the business, we've improved the sellability. Those are words we're going to explore some more in due course. Right? The cap rate has improved to 3 3/4, 3.75. And so when you multiply a bigger profit by a bigger cap rate, you arrive at a magic number. $675,000. We worked out we only needed $625,000. So now we're in the happy position where we might be able to sell the business at full value or even slightly less than full value and get the number that we need to fund the lifestyle that we want. So the question that we want each of you to start thinking about is, what is my business worth now? Do I know? Have I calculated it properly? How do I calculate it? And what do I want it to be worth, or what do I need it to be worth to fund the lifestyle or to fund the retirement or to give me the cherries that I'd like on my retirement strategy? Always an interesting thing to ponder. We're going to inform the pondering. Good so far? Yep. There's not too many audience participation moments, so nodding, shaking heads is about as good as we need. Okay. All right. So what's your business worth now? The stereotypical picture of, yep, let's just sit there and well, maybe not in the rain at the moment, but anyway. So one of the threshold issues that I'd really like you to hear, if you don't hear much else, please take this away. We need to be clear as to whether we are valuing the assets inside a company or a trust or a business structure, or whether somebody is buying the business structure. Right? It's entirely possible, if your business is inside a company, it's entirely possible for a buyer to come along and take all the business assets out, the client lists, the goodwill, the plant and equipment, the stationery, even the name, and pay the money into the company to say, thank you, we bought the business, but you're left with the company as a structure. And it's now just a cash box, a company full of cash. Right? That's one way that happens. And in small to medium enterprises, that's actually the most common business sale. Typically because a buyer does not want to inherit all the bad luggage that might be in your company. Right? So they'll take the assets out and leave you behind with the shell of your structure. Quite a common thing. We do that regularly. Okay. Other times, what we're doing is we're actually selling the shares in an existing company. And when that happens, the company continues doing all the things it had before. It's still got all the plant and equipment and the goodwill and the software and whatever it might be. That's all still inside the company. And the shareholders, instead of being held by this mum and dad or this couple or this group of people that are owners, those owners move out and the shares are moved to a new set of owners. Right? Moving the shares is still selling effectively the underlying business. Selling the business assets out of the company still has sold effectively the underlying business out. Right? But the approaches, the GST impact, the capital gains tax impact, the contractual details, completely different processes, right? Completely different strategies, completely different structures, completely different outcomes. So when you're talking about selling a business, one of the threshold questions is always going to be, what is the structure that business is owned in? And are we selling the structure with the business intact, or are we actually keeping the structure and selling the assets out? Right? Okay. And to reel off some friends of mine, the differences are GST, income tax, FBT, CGT, stamp duty, goes on and on and on. Completely different. Okay. So that's always an initial question. Small to medium enterprises, we're usually selling the assets out and leaving you behind with a trust or a company structure that's now a cash box and everything else has been removed. Okay. So what's the value of business? Of course, the accountant's answer, it depends, right? But it depends on a whole pile of things. There are a number of ways to value businesses. We'll talk about some of those in brief, but value can be calculated around an earnings base. So what is the revenue stream that a buyer is going to get? Right? That's going to be informed by risk to that revenue base. I'm going to get the revenue, but so much of that revenue is tied to something that the owner knows and the owner's relationships, that when the current owner disappears or falls back, I might not get those relationships, I might not get those contracts. There's some risk around that, one of many risks. What's the potential? I can see that if I take this business and maybe I bolt it onto my existing business, I can do a hell of a lot better, I can pull some cost out. Sometimes you sell a business on the basis of, actually, it might not be worth much to me, but it's worth a hell of a lot to you. So always got to be asking these questions. The different methods of valuing a business as we try and work out what's our current value in order to then identify our value gap to what we would like it to be. Most common one, and the one we will be talking about mostly tonight, capitalisation of future maintainable earnings, which sounds like a whole bunch of strange accountant's language. What it's really talking about is, what is that revenue stream? What's that profit stream that's going to be, and how much is it worth today for a buyer? Right? For a mature business and a mature marketing space, that's the most common valuation method used in small to medium enterprises. But it's not the only one. You can also look at just what is the net tangible assets. You do have businesses for where there is no goodwill, there's no certainty of revenue, and they simply sell on what is the value of the asset sitting in there. Right? So the factory, it might have a whole lot of machinery that has a second-hand value. It might have some other bits and pieces. It's selling just on those. Can be the case. The most academically rigorous and correct method is to do a discounted cash flow analysis of the future potential earnings of the business, discounted at an appropriate interest rate, back to today's dollars, and calculating that out. Right? Academically, utterly rigorous, academically very capable. Future predictions are always fraught with danger. It's also the most labour intensive and difficult to do. All right. And whenever accountants say labour intensive and difficult, you've got to hear high fees. Right? Okay. So that can be done. I'm not a fan of them, largely because I'm always time poor as well. And they're all based around future cash flow forecasts and Excel spreadsheets. And if any of you have played with Excel spreadsheets, it only takes one incorrect formula to bugger up the entire process.
They're good for startups and stuff that don't have history. So if you've got history, that's where your future maintainable earnings comes in. If it's a startup kind of company where you've gone and invested, built something or whatever, and then it's all about the potential and what it's going to earn in the future, you can't base it on what it's done historically. So you value it based on what it's hopefully going to do in the future.
So discounted cash flows. You then have a rule of thumb or an industry norm. Okay, some of these are useful, most of them are not. Right? If you are a buyer, it is very rare that a rule of thumb has been created by buyers. Right? Rules of thumb say, oh, you always get 100 cents in the dollar on last year's turnover, or it's always worth 50 cents of last year, or it's 3 times last year's profit, or some rule of thumb, or it's worth 500 client contacts is worth X dollars. It's a rule of thumb. Rules of thumb have mostly been invented by sellers and are mostly a bit above, in my experience, what the actual value really is. Great if you are a seller, great if there is that rule of thumb. Sometimes they're grounded in some semblance of reality, but treat with caution. Okay. There's also an industry norm. The industry norms, a lot of people love quoting industry norms when it's in their advantage, not when it isn't. But there's certainly good yardsticks if there is sufficient volume of trades that you get enough access to the information to do that. You might develop a bit of a feel for some things that are happening in the marketplace. And I know we've got a set of business brokers here. I'm not trying to insult your base on this, but you may well agree with some of it.
Definitely not so.
Okay. The last valuation method is, and certainly not the last, there's about 27 different valuation methods out there in the marketplace, but these are the most common ones. The last method that I will refer to is a cost to create, which is valuing the current business on the basis of what would it cost us to go and create a replica of it, and we'll pay something less than that, because otherwise we just go and create it ourselves. Okay. So we're going to mostly focus on the capitalisation of future maintainable earnings, which, as I say, is appropriate for mature businesses in a mature market space. Okay, so this is a very busy slide. We'll work through it. Okay. Mature business, stable revenue streams, reasonable certainty over future earnings. The capitalisation of future maintainable earnings is based around an assumption that the past history of revenue and of profitability is a predictor of the future. That is a fundamentally flawed assumption, as everybody discovered during a pandemic year, because hardly anybody predicted that. Right? We've had 100 years have passed without one, and then we did. So only those people whose predictions of the future were based on 100 years ago, the Spanish flu, were right. There are some people around who say that they did predict it, but largely, the past as a predictor of the future, it's as good a guide as we can get. It's an indicator, but it's never going to be proof. Right? And the words that we learned on a recent seminar that the directors were included on, all forecasts are wrong. Some are useful. Interesting conundrum. So, reasonable certainty over the earnings. The strengths of this is it is a widely used and accepted methodology. Most accountants would be able to say, yep, I understand the process around this. As I say, it does rely on the past as a basis for the future, and it's useful for comparability. Right? The weaknesses, as I said, it assumes the future will continue as the past did. As the saying goes, the future is not the same as the past, but it does rhyme. This method is completely unreliable where your earnings are very volatile. Volatility of earnings does not lend itself well to this space. And it's less reliable if you've got, as Melissa has said earlier, an immature business or a startup business where you don't have a good history of the previous. That's not going to really give you a good guide. So we're going to work with it, but recognise that it has its deficiencies. This one's pretty simple. The value, business value, is equal to the future maintainable earnings, we can have a look at that in a bit more detail, multiplied by a capitalisation rate. Right? Now, we'll talk about the capitalisation rate. Now, go back to kindergarten mathematics or second grade mathematics. If you multiply something by 0, what do you get? Zero. So if your future maintainable earnings, your profit stream is nil, your value is probably nil. And equally, if your capitalisation rate, if your business is so volatile and so risky that nobody would pay for it, if that's 0, and the higher the risk, the higher the volatility, the lower the cap rate, something times 0 is still 0. What do you get if you have a positive trend and an increasing trend on your profit and an increasing trend, a reducing risk and improvement in your risk profile of your business? If you're doing a multiplication right there, what do you get? Much bigger answer. So if you've got both factors working for you simultaneously, you do a lot better out of it. Okay? We might open some doors because there's stuff in the aircon seems like turned on. So let's start with then, having worked out that something times nothing is still nothing, we'll look at what is future maintainable earnings. Because future maintainable earnings is the critical issue here of what are we going to get for it. And this is profit, but it's profit as an indicator of what is going to be sustainable going forward. Okay? So if our profit is, and some of you may or may not be guilty of some of this. I'm sure you guys would have seen it. If you've got a profit, but the profit is down because you've taken every tax write-off you can possibly imagine, you've done the instant asset write-off, you've put your Ferrari into the company and claimed all the costs of that against the profit, and you really run that profit right down to zero, that's probably not a good indicator of what is your future maintainable earnings. It's an indicator that you did very good tax planning somewhere, right? And fantastic from that point of view. But that's not the maintainable revenue stream that a buyer might be excited to take on. Okay? Equally, you can also have situations where the owners have held back their salary, held back their super, and have let the business become more profitable while they've artificially deflated their salary. Right? And so the profit might look really, really good, because the owner's being a slave and working for free. Right? That's not a future maintainable earning. So in both cases, we would be looking to ensure that we have determined what is the future maintainable earnings with a reasonable slave labour, sweat, toil return, a reasonable salary for a working owner. That means you might have to do some thinking, and we can certainly guide this, some thinking as to what is a reasonable market value salary as opposed to a tax manipulated or other factor manipulated return that's been put through the books. Good so far? Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we're normalising the profit. That's a bit subjective. There are some objective figures we can use in there, but it is a bit subjective. Right? And then 1 year's result is not always a good answer. So what we'd typically be doing is we'd be taking 3 years of company or business financial data. We'd be normalising those 3 years' profits. And then the standard accounting valuation theory says, well, you assign the highest weighting to the current year, and then a slightly lower weighting to the previous year, and a slightly lower weighting to the year before that. Right? So we have 3 years worth of data, but the most current year carries the heaviest weighting in terms of the calculation. What that also means is if you've got a business sale that you're thinking about having and you've had 2 good years and the most recent year is a poor year, you might want to wait an extra year until that poor year works its way into a lower weighting before you go through a sale process, because the valuation is going to look at a poor year and say, oh, we'll assign the heaviest weighting to that poor year. Okay? So you just want to be careful around that. So we'll look at the weighted average profit for the last 3 years. You may or may not adjust for depreciation. Frequently it is. Some valuers work on the view that depreciation should be counted in. Right now, everybody's doing depreciation with instant asset write-offs and all sorts of funny tax-driven results. That can be adjusted as well. So we're looking to establish from history, what do we think is the most likely sustainable revenue stream coming forward? Right? And we're using history as our best indicator of that. I'm working on one at the moment where the client has said, yep, that history is really good, but I've just put on a new CEO. Right? That new CEO has had a significant lift in salary costs, and so our costs will be going forward. We think we'll be able to get that back in extra sales and extra efficiency, but we've taken the salaries that were in there and we've whacked on an extra $50,000 for the pay rise this new CEO is getting. Right? That's dropped profitability, obviously. Okay. So we look at these things. History is what history is, but you've always got to say, and what does the future, what do we know the future has by way of change? And you might make adjustments for that. That was just by way of example. All good? Cool. Right. So if we've worked out what our maintainable earnings figure is, and assuming it's above 0, because if that's 0, you don't need to do any further work. Not on this front, not on the valuation front. You need to do a whole lot of work to drive your profitability, but that might be the first thing to do, is come and have a chat with us about driving profitability. Okay. But if we've got profitability and future maintainable earnings, the next thing is, what is this capitalization rate? What's the multiplier? And how do we get to this multiplier? This multiplier is intended to reflect the risk of that revenue stream to a buyer. So how risky is it that that revenue stream will change? Right? And as I said in my introduction, if there's very high risk of that revenue being extremely volatile, a buyer will say, look, I can't be sure I'm going to get this for more than 6 months. So they might not pay very much for it. But if you've got locked in contracts and you've got monopoly rights and you're licensed by the government and the license can't be revoked, you get a multiplier of 5 or 6 or 7 because you've got guaranteed profits forevermore. Okay? Those figures relate to chemists. Chemists, we have experience in dealing with chemists. Chemists have a guaranteed monopoly. You can't set up in competition next door to them. Right? You have to get their permission to set up next door. That's one of the licensing requirements, right? So they can have their geographic territorial rights. Okay? They're cash flow positive from day one because everybody pays chemists in cash, but all their pills and potions are on 30 and 60-day terms. So you've got all your cash in before you've had to pay your suppliers. Right? They're cash flow positive. Right? And people, particularly in country areas, will only go to the same chemist and they'll go there forever. Right? And they don't really have a choice because somebody else can't set up in competition very easily. So chemists typically will be selling on multiples of 5s and 6s, and in country areas even up into the 7s. Right? Some of the most valuable, high-valued businesses that we see. Newsagents used to be in that space when they had a monopoly on all of the stationery and all the newspapers and the magazines and so forth. They were selling on multiples of 5s. Nowadays, newsagents are only making money on their soft gambling options. They don't make money on the stationery or the magazines or the newspapers anymore. In fact, if that's all they have, you will very rarely see a newsagent surviving without the pokies or the scratchies and so forth. Most of the value's in the scratchies, which really annoys me when all I want to do is buy a motorbike magazine. But anyway. Okay. Factors influencing the capitalisation rate. So we're looking for what are the risks that are going to impact on this revenue stream. Right? Do we have a great level of systems and procedures? Can it just be a old owners walk out, new owners walk in, and the whole thing keeps going? Right? Okay. How dependent is this business on the owner? Right? And I asked this question to one of my clients a few years ago, and he said, "Oh, I could leave tomorrow and the thing would keep going." I said, "That's fantastic. When was the last time you took a day's leave?" "Haven't had a day off in 5 years." If you can't afford to have a day off in 5 years, the owner dependency is pretty damn solid. Okay, right? And I had a long conversation with him. He did eventually sell and sell quite happily, but I had a long conversation with him around, I want you to create the business where you can take 3 weeks leave. His wife thanked me for that suggestion. Right? It took him 18 months to take his first 3-week holiday in 5 years. Right? So it takes a little while. Have you got system and procedure? Because a buyer can buy a revenue stream which is built around systems and procedures. If all those systems and procedures are in your head, I can't lobotomize what's in your head, right? And then inject it into mine, and even worse, you don't want to lobotomize what's in my head. That would be a disaster, right? It needs to be written down. It needs to be systemized. It needs to be something that somebody can walk in and buy and not have it just totally reliant on an owner's own head. Right? What's the capital investment required to maintain the income levels? Right? Do you have to put money in each year to buy new equipment, to update and refresh a brand or a positioning or something like that, a marketing spend? What do you need to put in each year? That informs the risk. Do we have forward contracts in place or some sort of annuity income? So we're on a subscription model, like all of our software these days. In the old days, you used to go down to the technology shop and you bought your software shrink wrapped in a box with plastic wrapper around it, right? Okay, that's all gone. Now you just go online, you download it and you pay a monthly fee, right? What's fantastic about that from the software companies providers, they have a monthly annuity income, right? They love it, okay, right? Can you arrange something like that in your business? That's where real value is seen these days, okay? Having that annuity recurrent income, annual subscription models. How do people like to get that if they're not in the software space, and most of you probably aren't? Loyalty cards. Loyalty cards is the simplest way of making sure that the same person comes back to you to spend money all the time. And if you've got a loyalty database where you actively market out to those people to have them keep coming back to you, that's worth something. So forward contracts, good long-term contracts, always a good sign. These are things that will drive up, the positive elements of this will drive up your multiplier. Negative elements on this will drive down your multiplier. In working out the risk, we also look at what would be the alternative of just going and sticking your money in the bank. 0.1% per annum interest rate return, not terribly exciting. Right? In the time that I've been around, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth these days, the rate of return expected in businesses was used to be benchmarked against 10%, then it became 8%, then it became 5%, right? And that's continuing the case as the rate that you can get on the share market or you could get in term deposits has shrunk. So the expectation of a business rate of return has also shrunk. In commercial property, which some of you may be familiar with, commercial property in Canberra used to sell on a 10% rate of return. Right? I've seen sales go through at 6s and 7s at the moment. Okay? And I'm told there's even some that are less than that. Okay. And then you look at the financial market conditions. We do business valuations. In the last 12 months, it's obviously been very, very difficult to do a valuation because what is the risk to this revenue stream in a pandemic? We didn't know for a while. Looks like we're almost back to business as usual in Canberra, which is fantastic. Not for everybody. There are still some pockets of absolute pain. We have some independent travel agents. There won't be many independent travel agents at the end of this pandemic. So, you know, there are still absolutely some areas where there is severe pain, but for most of our clients, they're doing quite well, thanks very much. And business, if you want to know how business is going, wander down through the Canberra Centre here at lunchtime. You hardly see a mask, you hardly see anybody concerned. Everybody does it. Still different in Melbourne. If you go to Melbourne, Victoria, you have to wear a mask as soon as you go into supermarkets. And I saw an article on the news tonight just before coming through. Victoria is going to 100% back to the office for the first time in 12 months next month. Right now, they're only allowed 50% of their team, or businesses are only allowed 50% of their team in their office spaces for office working. So, a bit different, provides a degree of uncertainty. So I've said at the bottom here, the most common multiples for small to medium entities are in the range of 1 to 5, right? Should actually say 0 to 5. There are some businesses that are actually not got any goodwill, not got any future value because they're just too volatile or too owner dependent. Okay, so 0 to 5. 5s, 6s to say for some pharmacies, 7 if it's out in the country, maybe if it's particularly well run, right? But most of our businesses will be in that sort of 1 to 3, 1 to 4 type space. Okay. So, and that's based on profit as adjusted to see what is maintainable profit. Okay, so if we go back to our example, we actually did this in the slide that I had a bit earlier. We have a business income, we have a profit amount, we're cutting a corner here and saying this profit is a guide to future maintainable earnings, which it may not be, but we cut that corner. We have a multiplier and therefore you have a value. Okay? And you might have the ability to improve that. You can improve this value in one of two ways. You can raise the future maintainable earnings, boost the profit, or you can raise the multiplier by taking risk out of the business, systemizing it, protecting it from competitors, making it a more solid, more stable, more predictable business. If it's an and, you're raising the profit and taking risk out, you're getting a double multiplier effect. Value goes up faster. And we can work with you very effectively on what is the way to help improve profitability, as well as what is the way to de-risk the business. And we have a standard questionnaire which we can bend, but our standard questionnaire in relation to the risking runs through 88 different areas that we can pay attention to in valuing the business and in identifying some ways to de-risk your business. Right? For many clients, 60 of the questions are irrelevant, but the 20 that remain are, this is where we need to work. And we can address some of those questions, we can drive value up. Okay. So that was valuing the business. Right? But you recall one of the early slides I said, you might be selling the business out of a company, or you might be selling the shares in the company. If you're selling the business out of the company, we've just calculated the business value. But the company might have some other assets lying around in it. The company might have some debt. Okay. In valuing the shares in the company, if you're doing a share transaction, we work out that business value, but then we have to add on, have we got surplus assets in this company that the new owner is going to get? Or do we have a company that's loaded up with debt and the new shareholders are going to inherit a whole lot of loans? Right? So when we get to valuing a share in the company or valuing the shares in the company, right, we take that business value that we've just done, but we have to add on surplus assets. So we look in the company and say, oh, look, is it full of cash because it hasn't sold, it hasn't paid any dividends, and it's just sitting on a truckload of cash. It doesn't need it for working capital. It's just, pregnant with profits, we like to say. And if that's the case, the share value will be higher because the new owners will be getting that cash that's still in the company, unless you pull it out. If you pull it out by way of dividend, you've pulled value out of the company, share value goes down. So that's one of the things we look at is share value, business value plus surplus assets. Working out what's surplus assets, always an interesting conversation, right? If you can see a Ferrari in there, that's probably a surplus asset, unless you're a Ferrari dealer. Okay. Most of the clients that I have that have Ferraris tell me it's a liability, not an asset, but anyway. So take a business value, add on any surplus assets. You also want to subtract, have you got a lot of external debt? Because when you're selling the shares in the company, the new owners inherit that debt. It's still sitting inside the company. Banks have all sorts of problems with that as a concept, right? But effectively, that's what's happening. Okay? So to calculate a share value, you've got to do a second stage process, which is to take the business value you've already calculated, add on the surpluses, subtract the loans. And if you've got a company that is saddled up to the eyeballs with debt, you might end up back at zero or even beneath zero. That's not a happy space to be in. Okay? So I've just talked you through what we're doing around there, right? So do the extra steps on there. And it comes back to right from the beginning, that early slide. What are you going to sell? Which path is it? Are you selling the assets out of your structure, but you're keeping the structure, keeping any surplus assets and probably keeping any debt? Or are you actually selling it at the shares level, in which case somebody's inheriting those surplus assets and the debt? And obviously you can have some arrangements where a share sale goes through, but on the condition that debts are repaid, or that, a share sale goes through, but you recognise that prior to the sale going through, the Ferrari is going to be sold out back to the owner, or dividends going to be paid and value is going to leak out appropriately in that way. And that's all part of the strategy and the plannings that we can do. Right? I've got one client they're working on at the moment. They've got assets in Central Australia. And for a whole pile of reasons, they need the current market value of the company to be calculated on a pre-capital gains tax, because the company was set up in 1968. Right? And some of the assets are post-capital gains tax. Right? And at the moment, there's a whole lot of tax rules around it has to be a 25-75 ratio. Right? And they're at 24.8. And before the sale goes through, we're going to pull a whole bunch of dividends out, right? So that we have more space on that. Okay? So there can be good tax-driven reasons why you do things in particular sequences. Okay? That was making me quite nervous. Okay. So before I move on, good so far on how do we calculate the current value of the business, right, in order to determine do we have a gap from what we want it to be in the future. Yeah? Good. There's a participation moment, nod, shake, make appear like you're awake.
Questions is the point.
Yeah, any questions? Yes? No?
Oh, well,
No.
just scratching my head.
You're allowed to do that. Okay. So,
Does anyone need a top up?
yep. So Melissa's offering to top up some drinks and with some help from down the back. And otherwise, look, I can see Tim Tams on the table still. They're very disappointing. Please get into them, because otherwise I've got to eat them. There's just no good. So help yourselves.
We've realised, we warned you were guinea pigs. We've realised the base building aircon turns off at 6 o'clock. So we will come up with
That's what it is.
the next one.
Right, yeah.
You're fine. You're fine. Okay. So we'll keep going. Please do help yourself with something. And I've just shown Jared how to turn the base building air conditioning on for a moment. So hopefully we'll get some air happening. Right. How to improve the value of your business. You recall I said there's two things. Let's drive up profitability. Let's de-risk the business so we can drive up those multipliers. How to improve the value of the business. We could do, and we will do in all likelihood, a boardroom briefing for 3.5 days on how to do business improvements. Right? So not going to do that tonight because most of you want to get home. But some of the things you can do will all be centered around having a plan and then implementing your plan for how to build value. Okay, that might be through actually acquiring some extra business. Right? If you've got a good sound business and you want to just drive some volume, bolt on somebody else's business, buy out a competitor and bolt it onto yours. Okay, it might be through chasing down new customers. It might be down through growth planning. In fact, without paying much attention to there's 4 ways to grow a business, and only 4. Right? Anybody know what the 4 ways to grow a business are? Broker guys, you should know this stuff.
I'll let Michael take the lead.
Presumably increase the turnover, reduce the cost of goods sold. Can't get the full.
Okay. Anybody else want to take a guess? 4 ways to grow a business. Only 4.
Reduce the debt.
Sorry?
You still need to reduce the debt.
So that's not growing the business. That
No,
might
but-
increase the value a little bit, but that's not growing the business is my question. 4 ways to grow a business.
Charge more money.
Put the prices up.
I'll trust you to come up with that first.
So 4 ways to grow the business. All right. Number 1. Everybody usually says this is the one that normally comes out first. Get more customers.
Yeah.
Right? Get more customers. Most expensive of all because you've got to get somebody who's not spending money in your place to come in, find you and spend money in your place. All right. So number 1, get more customers. Okay. Number 2, get them to come back more often. Right? Same customer, but get them to attend more often. Okay. How do you do that? Loyalty cards. All right. Same customer doing the same thing, coming back more often. Right? The only place I'll go to get my coffee is this place down the road. They've got your loyalty because they gave you a loyalty card. Same customer spending the same money, spending it more often. So get more customers, get the same customers to come back more frequently. Right? Second method. Third method, right? Have them spend more when they're there. McDonald's was the expert at the third method. You want fries with that? You want a drink with that? Right? Client is already there. They've already got their wallet open. They're already spending money. Get them to spend a little bit more. Okay? So clothing store, you're down at the clothing store, buying a suit, buying whatever it is. Would you like a tie with that, sir? Right? Would you like a scarf to go with your blouse, madam? Right? 4 ways to grow, 3 of them. None of them involve cutting costs. You can cut costs down to 0 in theory, hypothetically, and you haven't grown anything except profit, good, right? But you haven't grown the size of the business. What you've done is cut costs. And it's actually very difficult to build a business through cutting much. You can get some short-term profitability out of it, which is great. Right? So 4 ways to grow, 1, 2, and 3. There's actually only 3, but all 3 of those are built on the foundation of the 4th. And the 4th one is make sure you have capacity, create capacity and efficiency in your firm so that there is a hunger and a capability to address those first 3. Right? Everything else, putting the prices up, might drive some profitability, but it doesn't actually grow the firm. You're just extracting more money for the same transactions. And for most places, there is competition. There is a limit to how far you can jack your pricing up. Right? Not everybody, but mostly. So 4 ways to grow. There's actually only 3, and they all involve quantity, not price. The quantity of customers, the quantity of times they come back, and the quantity they spend each time they're with. You're doing it consistently. Right? McDonald's makes it consistent. Right? And if any of you have ever worked behind the counter at McDonald's, okay,
Thanks.
no, I have, right? And only a few years ago during a charity day, right, where it was if you came in as part of your charity and provided labour for a few hours, you got a cut of the profits from the McDonald's for a while. So I still find a McDonald's counter in my coat and tie and serve people, and where it says, when somebody says behind the counter, do you want fries with that? It's not because they thought about it. It's because that screen in front of them says, do you want fries with that? They can read it on the screen. They have systemized it down to the brass bazoo. And if you've already ordered fries, it says, do you want a drink with that?
Try to upsell the client.
Correct. Right? Systemized it, right? You don't have to think. Valuable stuff. So how to improve the value of your business? You might be able to think about adding new services, doing capital expansions, moving into a niche space, lots and lots of things that you can think about around that. And we're very happy to do strategic planning days with you, or identify, or just be a sounding board where you can bounce your ideas off us. And we've got some experience and been around the block on some of these things. So recognize that if you're improving the value, what are you doing? You're either driving revenue up, profit up, and or you're de-risking the business and adding to the multiplier on the business. And if you're doing both, you get a multiplier effect that makes value go up even faster. It's not a plus, it's a times. No? So whenever you're thinking about the valuing of your business, and you're thinking about what do I do about it, the focus has got to be, am I driving something that's going to add to future maintainable earnings? And or am I improving that capitalisation rate, de-risking the business, improving the system, improving the process, less reliance on the owners? Okay. Reduce the risks. What are you doing on those? If you're working on both of those at the same time and improving both of those at the same times, it's happy days. Okay. Doing that with an end in mind. You know, what is the end in mind? We've calculated, or you've calculated, you've had some help. Bob's very good at doing this. This is the amount that you need to fund the retirement lifestyle that you want to have. This is what you've got at the moment. Here's the gap. We need to close that gap. Right? How are we going to do that? Let's think through strategically what is the actions that we can take to bring that gap back faster. Okay. Improve your business. Change will be needed. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to achieving business growth and business change are the owners. Not unusual. I have had to sack an owner previously. The biggest obstacle to you making money is yourself. Get out of the way and your team will do better. Interesting conversation. John Everell also did that for one of our clients many years ago, our founder. Change does need to be orderly. There's a fair bit of change fatigue out there at the moment. Most people who have run a business through a pandemic have now had a lot of sleepless nights. Who had to deal with force-fed change, whether it's how to do your COVID-safe business plan, whether it's how to deal with client dips and then rises, whatever it is, there's a fair bit of change fatigue. And here I am saying you might need to do more change. Right? Obviously, this change is for your benefit and direct benefit in doing so, but orderly, considered, taking the team with you on your journey, good way to be. We also recognise we're accountants. Nobody has an unlimited amount of time, energy or money. Energy at the moment is the biggest issue for most business owners that I've been talking to. They're tired. I understand that. Got to work within the constraints that you have. Okay. Strategy, prioritise plan, working out what is low-hanging fruit that drives up value faster or drives up profit faster, right? And putting the energy into those easy wins. Short-term, quick, easy wins that are aligned with our long-term plan, good way to be. Okay. Doing that in a strategic planning session. We run strategic planning sessions for clients. We can spend a day or 2 half days, whatever might be needed, and say, okay, where are we now? Where do we want to be? What are the steps to implement to get there? Right. How fast and how soon? Okay. There's a whole lot of critical issues facing owners at the moment. This is all very negative stuff, but let's recognise that it exists. We'll move on pretty quickly. Spending too much time working in and not working on the business. Right? There's a guy that I was hoping would attend tonight. He's been on the tools all the time. He should not be on the tools. He's running a $2 million business and he's out there fixing desks and changing things and whatnot. That is not the way to run the business. Right? It might be a necessity, but gee, he would be better off lining up the next 5 contracts than dealing with the fallout from the last 10. Right? Keeping your team retained and motivated for most businesses is a challenge, especially in Canberra, where you've got the big elephant of the public service that sets rates and sets conditions, and that then leaks over into the private sector. At the moment, there's record numbers of people who are saying they want to sell their business because they're tired, they've survived a pandemic. We'll see what happens with that. Those numbers are, supposedly out there. This is sourced from some of the newspaper and some of the business journals. I don't know if you guys are seeing these sorts of the results coming through. We're beginning to see some signs of it around the place. One of the interesting factors is number 4. Your youngsters are looking at you guys and saying, we don't want to be you. You're not a great role model. Right? You two down the back, you can just close your ears at the moment. They're looking up to you guys and going, really? Is that what business success looks like? Have a think about the example you're setting. It needs to be and to visibly be something that the next generation aspire to. Generational success is sometimes not interested. The standing joke in our place, we deal with a small number of farms, and farming succession was we always leave the farm to the firstborn son, to which the firstborn son looks up and says, so drought and rain and 7-day weeks and whatnot. Gee, thanks, Dad. Don't like that idea. Succession within families is always interesting. Succession beyond families is even more interesting. That doesn't always mean that it will be inside the family. It can be, might not be. I'm just finishing doing succession with one farming family. It's a significant farm. They turn over about $1 million a year. Right? In most years, even bad ones, they were doing 700,000-800,000. First generation to second generation, it's taken 5 years to implement the plan. Right? So 5-year process, and it's not quite finished yet. The owners are not prepared for succession. Yeah, I want out. Oh, but I'm not going to go out. I'll develop a nervous tick. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. If you're not ready for it, you're not ready for it. You don't know what you want to get out for. One of the most common phone calls that I get into my office whenever we have valuation questions is, Rob, I'm thinking of selling. I've no idea what I should even ask. What price should I put on it? Never even thought about that. And for almost all those conversations, my first question is, have you ever sold a business before? And they were, nah. I'm really good at selling travel or goods or sheep or whatever it is you do, or sort of software or consulting services. Never sold an actual business before. It's a very different process. We have done that with lots of clients. We can walk you through it. We can hold your hand and make sure you get a good outcome, or as good an outcome as you can in the market. Poor adoption and adaptation to technology. If you have the oldest manual systems around, you aren't going to be sexy to a young generation buyer. As simple as that. Okay? There's lots of technology that makes life simpler, right? In business life. And again, we can help, particularly in the accounting side of those things, obviously. So, having solid foundations as we look at strategy, and I'm moving more towards the succession conversations now, right? Moving away from the valuation gap. We've worked out we're going to do a current valuation, we're going to do some financial planning calculations of what we need, and if there's a shortfall, can the business be brought up to fill that in? In doing that, you're going to ask some deeper questions around your business. Right? Why does your business exist? What's it here for? And the answer is not to make a profit. The answer is to look after your clients, customers, to deliver value, to do something positive in the community, whatever else it is. But if it's purely to make a profit, you've probably missed the boat somewhere. The purposes of the business, according to one TED talk, and it's got a fair bit of traction, the purpose of business is to create value for customers, to create value for your team members, to create value for the owners. All right? And if you're not creating value for the customers, you won't have them for long. They have to perceive value one way or another. Right? Statement of the obvious. Right? And you want to do that, obviously, while still being corporately and socially responsible. Right? You can probably make a lot of money out of slavery. Might not be very responsible. And more buyers are actually looking upstream to say, is there slavery in this space? Because I don't want to know those guys. Just by way of example. So, in analysing your business, you can analyse it any number of ways. You can go and use your favourite search engine to find all sorts of business analytical tools out there. There exist. Some of them are very much centred on American assumptions. Be careful with those because their system is actually quite different to ours in many respects. There are some similarities, but there's also some quite significant differences. But in thinking about your business and therefore heading towards some strategic planning around where you're going with it to build revenue or build lower risk, different lenses. What's your client experience? Or what's your customer experience? Right? Who are they? Where are they? What are they? What are they looking to do? Where do they see value? And can you provide or improve on that value? Products and services. What are you actually offering? Right? If you're a dry cleaning shop, do you offer same-day delivery or pickup? You know, do you offer minor repairs? What's in it for dry cleaning? By way of example. You know? How do you do your marketing? Do you do any marketing? Do you need to do any marketing? You know? One of the things that we said, some of you will have heard our advertisements on the radio from time to time, on some of the radio. Yes, a couple of you. Good. Depends on which station you listen to. If you listen to the ABC, you won't hear any advertisements. One of the things that we got a little bit frustrated with a few years ago was we're a 50-year-old business, but a lot of people hadn't heard of us in town. So we're doing radio, we're getting a bit of promotion out there, and now when we go to the business chamber events and various other corporate events, we go, we're from, oh, I heard your advertisement on radio. We've got some name recognition, some brand recognition out of that. Right? Some of you may need to do that, some of you may not. Digital marketing, online marketing, what are you doing to generate that funnel of continuous new clients, new customers? Look at the pillar of your business through your team. For some of you, your team is going to be a critical element of what you're building. Do you have great retention? If you're selling your business, can you incentivize your team to stay for the new owners? Right? The deal that I was talking about a little while ago, £2 million, right? The key two people have been told that they're in line for a very significant bonus if they'll stay for 12 months after the sale. Right? And that's putting a pair of handcuffs on these guys because they are seen as being key to the future value of the business, and they weren't owners. They're not getting money at the ownership level, so they've been given an employment incentive to stay. Right? And that's being worked into the whole valuation process. Right? If the team is critical, what are you doing to keep them? Systems and processes, which is a really boring phrase, but if you've systemized your business and you've got processes in there so that a trained monkey can deliver profits, that's worth a lot more than if it's all in your head. Go back to that early statement. Or if it's all in the head of your senior manager who's got all the relationships and all the information, your risk is now pretty solid on that senior manager. So maybe that person needs to be incentivized. Systems and process. If it's written down, if it's documented, how we do it here, how we do it here, manual. How many of you got one of those? No, good. No. Okay. Yep. Franchises are often good at handing out some of that information.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of that. Just I'll make a comment. When we went from an American to a European agency owners, the change was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Because Americans believe that whatever works in America can work anywhere else in the world, but that's not true.
Interesting worldview.
Yes.
Okay. So systems and processes, and last but not least on this, have a look at your business with cold, rational light of day. What are the finances telling you? Right? I'll give you an example of that. Many years ago now, had a client who came in and said, look, I've been offered this opportunity to buy the business. They want this much money. It looks like a good deal. And I said, great, let's have a look at the numbers. I'm an accountant, I still want to see numbers. And we got into the numbers and the seller had been a bit daft. The seller had handed over their full financial statements to the potential buyer. From my point of view, this is gold. I can dig in and see what's going on. Right? And what we found when we went digging into it was lease expenses. Right? Lease expenses were quite high. Okay? This was a courier business with a whole lot of courier vehicles. Okay? And what had happened was 4 years earlier, they'd gone out and completely refreshed their fleet of vehicles, and all of their vehicles had been put on 5-year leases, which was the first of their mistakes because courier vehicles very rarely last years. Right? So they were going to have dead vehicles but still have debt. That was their first mistake. The second mistake was they'd done all of them at the same time, and all 5 of the residual sets of payments, they weren't leasing them down to a debt of nothing, they were leasing them down to a debt that was still sitting at 30%. Right? And 5-year-old courier vehicles are never worth 30%. Right? In the meantime, the business had come down, the cost of repairing and running these things had gone up. So the reason why the seller was excited to sell was they simply didn't have the cash to pay out the residuals on all of these vehicles. And worse, when they did get to that point, the vehicles weren't going to be worth enough to sell them and actually recover that debt that they had to pay out. So they were in a world of pain. They'd been smart enough to identify this about 10 months in advance and said, we're for sale, buy all this stuff. Right? I was able to say to my client, if you wait 10 months, they're going to go broke. Or you can go in now and do a low ball offer and they'll have to wear the debt. It'll be their problem. You buy the assets out, you leave them with a company full of debt. Right? And my client grinned at me and said, "I'll wait until I go broke." And that's exactly what he did. Very astute businessman. Okay. Without that knowledge, he'd have paid quite a lot more. Right? So take a cold hard look at the finances. Is there something in there that can tell you something? Right? We found that. Okay. So succession planning, we've driven up our business value, we've driven up our profits, we've got the multiplier happening. What's going to happen next? Well, yeah, sometimes the negative, you're just going to close down. Right? There is no buyer in the market. We've seen that happen. Right? Despite the thing that the thing might be valuable, it might be good, at that particular time, there might be nobody who wants to buy it. It does happen. Okay? Doesn't mean you didn't do a good job of everything, just meant that your timing was poor by accident. You might be able to form a syndicate of other people to slowly buy into your business. You might be able to sell it to some of your existing team members. Right? There's lots of ways out of the maze, and you need to keep some of these doors open. Always good to have some options. So yes, I'm negotiating with my senior team and hoping that they'll buy me out. But there's also this firm down the road who think that I'm a bit of a troublesome competitor. So they might buy me out just to take me out of the way. Right? And I'm working with one client at the moment where I said, what you need to do is you need to raise the size of your business. So instead of being a minor irritation, you lift your status to thorn in the side, and then you'll get bought out by your competition. Right? He said, yes, I'll do that. I'll go and make a nuisance of myself to the competition. Perfect. Right? And you'll just be bought out. The mob, the industry that he's in the space that they play in, that mob is quite famous for buying up firms that get in their way. So that, go and become an obstacle, become a thorn in their side. Right? That might be one of the things. Sometimes you are just selling off a client list. The only thing you've got is a portfolio of names and contacts, and you're going to sell those off to somebody else who can make use of it. Right? That's common, particularly in professional services. That can be commonly where there is value achieved. Okay? And you've got various other options in there. Selling the business, selling the assets out of the business. Selling the assets is just a fire sale, perhaps, of what's left over. So one of those that Pritchie was in here earlier. Pritchie's looking at a fire sale of some assets with me for one of her clients. Selling the business, frequently the business will sell to somebody you already know. It might be a competitor. It might be within the same trade or industry. Or it might be somebody that you've met over dinner. But it's relatively less common in the small to medium enterprise space for a business to sell to somebody who's a complete unknown. It's probably somebody you've already seen. Not always. Okay. So we can do a mountain of work around succession planning, but it still comes down to who's going to buy it. We've got fantastic succession planning strategies and directions and calculations and tax analysis and all sorts of really good things, and tax exemptions, not a whole bunch. But you need somebody who's going to be a buyer. And being connected to other people in the marketplace, attending business chamber events, attending industry events, attending events where some of your other players will be, you might find out what's going on. You might actually be a predator out to buy somebody else. Right? Or you might find that you're the person who's going to be happily eaten by somebody else. In business, there was an old saying that I used for a little while. When you're a growing small business, it's either eat or be eaten. Eat up somebody else to expand, or recognise that you're somebody else is going to eat you up. That might be a great exit strategy. That might be okay. Right? Might not. Depends on what your strategy is. Trade sales, internal succession, early identification of team members, a long engagement process for that. But at the end of the day, the old cliche, every business should be sellable. Even if you don't actually sell, it should be sellable. Okay? Build that capital value. Okay? One thing that's absolutely certain is nobody lives forever. And sooner or later, the business is going to be moved on, whether that's through an estate or whether that's because somebody has bought you, is something that hopefully you'll be able to control. But if you've made your business sellable, it'll be easier to achieve. Cool. All good so far? No, yes, we're awake. Cool. Right. So in conclusion, if you're planning to sell, undervaluing your business can reduce your future retirement lifestyle. One thing that's certain is if you put it up for sale at this price, you will not get a higher price. Right? Nobody comes along and says you're selling it too cheaply. Here's more money. Very rare anyway. I haven't heard it happen, but it's pretty darn rare. Okay, right. Planning the sale of the business well in advance, so you've driven it up and you feel like you're maximising the sale of your business, and you're riding, the right end of the curve, because sometimes businesses get a bit too mature and then they fall off the edge and they're on a downward slope. Be in control. Don't have your succession choice imposed on you. All right. That is, I've had a major health issue and I have to sell, and I've only got a small number of months to sell in. That's not going to be a good experience for anybody, right? Except maybe the buyer. Running it at your timing is always fantastic. So as we wind up, and we said we'd get you out of here by 7. I've talked for way too long. And we'll have some questions in a moment. But what we're talking in the business value and the value gap is identify the value of the business now. We can help you do that very effectively, very efficiently. Identify what you might need it to be and by when. What is your future retirement needs? What value does this company need to deliver, or this business need to deliver to you in the future? Right? How long have you got? Can we close, if there is a gap? Hopefully there's not, but for most people there is. If there is a gap, what can we do to close that gap? Drive profitability up, drive risk down so we have a better multiplier. All right? Work out a succession plan so that not only are we driving value, but we're actually identifying exit paths through that maze of potentials. And with not just one path, right? We've actually got multiple options for how to manage our escape. So work out our succession plan to sell most effectively, and allow us to help. This is where we can drive real value beyond just doing tax returns and signing and ticking boxes. We can do all of that. This is where we can help drive real value, especially if we can get you into a tax exempt sale. Okay, so with that winding down, any particular questions? We can do all sorts of things. There's all sorts of good stuff. It is in your handouts out there. Hang around with that. We have all of our various different brands that operate from within our firm here. And we always finish with the most important part of this is general advice. If you need specific advice, come and talk to us. This is just a training seminar, so don't sue us over this. Yes, sir.
Just one question about business valuation.